Right, so we've got a very interesting clip from James O'Brien in light of the murder of Charlie Kirk. As always, I'll give you my full thoughts at the end of the video.
We return to that hideous killing in America. Two things that we picked up on yesterday. I think one of these problems was solved. I began yesterday's programme not really having a very clear idea of who Charlie Kirk was, or indeed what he stood for. And I ended it with a much clearer idea, which it is not quite as straightforward a process as you might think. I got a few messages yesterday complaining that we were playing out clips of what the chap actually said, the self-styled free speech champion. And then I bumped into Ian Dale yesterday evening, and he said, "Oh, you're getting a lot of flack on Twitter." And I said, "Well, what on earth have I done now?" And he said, "Oh, people think that you were wrong to play out clips of Charlie Kirk talking." I'm like, how can anybody be cross that you're playing out? I mean, what would he want in the aftermath of his appalling murder? Would he want his positions, his arguments, his messages to be more widely disseminated than ever before? Or would he want people to essentially censor him posthumously? How can it possibly be... I don't know. I gave up trying to work out what passes for the logic in the minds of these kind of people a long time ago. It's not true, is it? I'll never give up trying to work it out. But I gave up much hope that I would ever succeed. And the other bit that was missing from the analysis, from the entire story, was the definition of who they were. So Donald Trump moved immediately, as Donald Trump will always do, to turn this tragedy into whatever would be most to the benefit of Donald Trump. And so he elected to list attacks upon Republican politicians, refer to attacks upon Republican politicians, and completely ignore attacks upon Democrat politicians, many of which have been undertaken by people who were proven to be Donald Trump supporters or Donald Trump admirers, and talked about radical left rhetoric. I heard a lot of talk, I've seen a lot of talk about they. I'll play you a clip in a moment of a Fox News commentator saying they're at war with us. And I genuinely don't know who they are. And obviously there's a frisson of concern, not necessarily fear, that it just means anybody who keeps telling the truth about these people and this movement. Anybody who, for example, considers it absolutely unconscionable that you could pardon insurrectionists who attacked the Capitol and left the police officers traumatized, terrified, and even dead. You know, I mean, is that what he means? What is the radical left rhetoric? So there were two things missing from our conversation yesterday. And I answered one of those questions. I now know what he stood for. I don't remove, and I appreciate some people have been less empathetic than me, if you like. But I don't resile a single scintilla of sympathy and horror at what happened to the guy. I used the word courageous yesterday to describe my reaction to the discovery that he always debated people. I don't know that I would reuse that word today, because I've had a look at some of the clips, I've had a look at some of the debates, and I don't really know how courageous it was. I've also seen quite a lot of clips of him losing, but the criticisms he received... But I'll tell you why I say that, because I don't think I'm courageous. And what he did essentially was what I do from a very different political position and not on the radio. So if I get the better of somebody, there'll be a long queue of people claiming that I've been condescending or I've bullied them, or we can't really edit things to make me look better than I actually am, because the whole flipping show is up on YouTube from beginning to end. But I don't want to be yin to his yang, and I'm obviously nowhere near as important on the political stage on either side of the Atlantic. But I don't know that it's courageous to say, prove me wrong. I just used the word to describe him in contrast to a lot of people who seem to have similar politics and will never stand up and be counted. So in relative terms, he had more courage than Hank Buncher-Numbers with a bald eagle avatar who spends his life disseminating negativity and bigotry on social media. And I didn't like what I discovered about him. And the more I discovered about him during yesterday's programme, the more troubled I was by the response, particularly of Boris Johnson, actually, who talked about all he ever did was say common sense things. And then you read some of the things that he'd actually said, or you listened to some of the things that he'd actually said, and you wondered whether Boris Johnson, the nicest thing you could say about Boris Johnson was that he didn't know. He should have listened to yesterday's show because he was responding. And that, of course, is when I realised why people would get so cross about anybody reading out what he'd said or playing out actual footage of him talking. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine casting yourself as a disciple of somebody you describe as a free speech champion, and then he tragically gets murdered by persons as yet unknown, which is an element of the conversation that we're moving towards. He tragically gets murdered, and all of the people who consider themselves to be disciples of a free speech champion have hissy fits and conniptions over the words that he spoke, over people playing the words that he spoke. I'm not often completely baffled by bigotry, but I've got to tell you, that one's got me right in the confused zone of my brain. So you don't want me to find out what he stood for, even as I condemn his murder? Why don't you want me to find out why don't you want people to know what he stood for? Surely that's a grave disservice to his memory. You think he'd be ashamed of the things that he was recorded saying? You think he'd be ashamed of the positions he adopted? You think he'd be ashamed of the arguments that he made? Or are you ashamed of the fact that you agree with them and therefore you don't want anybody holding up the mirror? As usual, generally when I'm completely baffled by people, I realise it is what they see in the mirror that's being held up that they're repelled by, rather than the person actually holding up the mirror. That just becomes a wonderful exercise in projection. So I'm categorically not praising the man, but I am discovering with every passing hour the reality of his opinions. And that then takes us to the reaction. And I've seen actually one right-winger. I'm not familiar with him. I'm not that plugged into American politics. And I don't know whether he's ignorant of history or whether he's absolutely stupid. But I've seen one right-wing commentator this morning suggesting that this is like the Reichstag fire in Nazi Germany. The Reichstag fire, if you don't know, involved the German parliament building being set on fire by one individual who was a Dutch communist. And Hitler used it to claim that this was all part of a massive conspiracy by all the communists, because 1930s Germany could have gone either way. It could have gone far left or far right. And Hitler knew that. The biggest threat to him politically was probably from communists. And he therefore lied about it being a massive conspiracy of people, and that they had to round up all the communists. And once they started rounding up the communists and closing down democracy and co-opting the judiciary, you know what happened next. So I was a little surprised to see that point being made by somebody who would very much style themselves as on the same side of politics as Donald Trump or indeed Charlie Kirk. I didn't know Charlie Kirk was one of the people that lied about the 2020 election. So, again, you know, I don't know what his position was on the insurrectionists, but pardoning people who've tried to overthrow democracy by using political violence is surely, under any analysis whatsoever, more of a catalyst for political violence than calling people names. And then I've also found myself in the last 24 hours reading people who used to claim that calling people names is just hurty words. Even Farage is in the Daily Mail today complaining about people being called names. And yet these are the guys who 10 minutes ago were telling us that our free speech was under that. I mean, I'm just really confused. Until you start wondering whether it is, as always, all about the race. As is often the way, the transgender people being used as camouflage in the first instance to go all in on the racism. Allowing public discourse to be vile again in the context of transgender people, you're never going to get that genie back in the bottle, and all of the people whose bigotries extend far beyond one issue have been filling their boots ever since. I want you to listen to something. First of all, I want you to listen to this. This is a political commentator from the Republican Party. I think he used to work for George Bush. He definitely worked for one of the George Bushes. I just can't completely remember which one. This guy got sacked
he's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech or sort of aimed at certain groups. And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions.
That is a guy called Matthew Dowd speaking on MSNBC. He got fired for those words shortly afterwards. This is a guy called Jesse Waters speaking on Fox News in more or less the same window of time, and both in response to this horrible murder.
Trump gets hit in the ear. Charlie gets shot dead. They came after Kavanaugh with a rifle to his neighborhood. They went after Musk's cars. They just shot 2 Jews outside the embassy. Think about it. Scalise got shot, barely survived. It's happening. You got trans shooters. You got riots in L.A. They are at war with us. Whether we want to accept it or not, they are at war with us. And what are we going to do about it? How much political violence are we going to tolerate? And that's the question we're just going to have to ask ourselves. Now, Charlie would want us to put as much pressure on these people as possible. Dana nailed it. This is unacceptable and has to stop. And it has to stop now. And everybody's accountable. And we're watching what they're saying on television and who's saying what. The politicians, and the media, and all of these rats out there. This can never happen again. It ends now. Greg's right again. This is a turning point, and we know which direction we're going.
He's still got a job. And, you know, I share his condemnation of political violence, but who are they? Who is this homogenous group of people that are all responsible for the actions of those individuals? I mean, he did actually go further.
We're angry, and we're resolute. And we're going to avenge Charlie's death in the way Charlie would want it to be avenged.
Are you talking about avenging now? And how can you be opposed to political violence but supportive of a man who pardoned the January the 6th insurrectionists? You remember that footage, you saw it, you watched it. Donald Trump lost an election and his supporters attacked the Capitol and attacked the public servants working there and bayed for the blood of the actual vice president. I still don't know enough about Charlie Kirk to know how he would feel about the coverage of his murder. But, I mean, I'm certain that he wouldn't want people to be complaining about hearing his words being repeated and disseminated. And I don't know. I mean, listen, if you're going to... You talk about all of the people that Waters guy just talked about, and it's right to do so, but you then have to talk about Melissa Hortman and her husband, targeted in their homes, killed by a Trump supporter. It's a matter of record. The man charged with the attempted assassination of Pennsylvania's Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro in April, a Trump supporter. 4 Democratic elected officials targeted in New Mexico in 2022. The man who tried to kidnap the Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and actually assaulted her husband Paul. That's something that Donald Trump Jr. made jokes about. Imagine if someone was making jokes, someone in public life, a really senior Democrat, was making jokes about Charlie Kirk's murder now. What do you think would happen to them? But Donald Trump's son made jokes about attempted kidnap and attack upon senior Democrats. Everybody who wanted to hang Mike Pence on January the 6th, 2021 was a Trump supporter. By definition, if you were there, you weren't just a Trump supporter, you were also spreading lies, buying lies, disseminating lies, or, to be generous, believing lies. And the list goes on. And the list should be married to the other list. They should all be on the same list. Gabby Giffords shot in the head, a Democrat. We speak about they, all of these Democrats. Is there some unidentified homogenous group, the radical left? Who are you talking about? People who support political violence. There are 2 types of people. People who support political violence and people who don't. Actually, there are 3 types of people. There are people who undertake political violence, and they are the worst. All right? Then there are the people who support political violence, and they are the second worst. And then there are the people who abhor and condemn political violence, and they are all of us. Why is that suddenly complicated in the context of this story? Why is it suddenly tribal? Why is it political or footballified? Here are the people who undertake political violence, up to and including whoever turns out to have shot Charlie Kirk and all of the people, for example, who attacked the Capitol in 2021. Here are the people who support political violence, whoever is doing it. And here are the people who don't. That's a scary division, right? That's a really scary division. Because you kind of end up being told, in this context, in this sort of crucible of very carefully cultivated hatred, that anybody who disagrees with you is responsible for the political violence enacted against the people who agree with you. Anybody who disagrees with you, it's a bit like what they tried to do with the Palestinian peace marches. If you're protesting, if you're demonstrating solidarity with innocent people being killed in Gaza, then you must support Hamas. If you disagree with Donald Trump, then you must support the people who tried to kill him. If you disagree with some of the racist conspiracy theories that Charlie Kirk adhered to, notably the Great Replacement theory, if you disagree with that, then you must somehow endorse his murder. I mean, is that what they're saying? Is that what it is? Is it actually a lot simpler than it originally looks? It's all about controlling the narrative. And the narrative is that everybody who disagrees with us, just as we saw with the Reichstag fire, everybody who disagrees with us deserves the violence that we are pretending to condemn and abhor.
First and foremost, I do want to be respectful and just say rest in peace. I do think this is a really divisive moment in the West, because you have a lot of people from both sides kind of using this as a tool to fuel a specific point or agenda that they're trying to push, which does just seem a little bit messed up in my opinion. And I think James O'Brien initially played some clips a few days ago with kind of the things Charlie Kirk has said. And I think this stirred a lot of people up the wrong way. And it's quite interesting, right? Because I think the point he's making is like, he is playing clips of someone who James O'Brien admitted didn't know too much about. But then people on the right are getting angry that he's playing clips about him, and it's like, what's the anger for? And I think the comparison to the Gaza protests is particularly astute. You know, if you criticize Israeli policy, you must support Hamas. If you criticize Trump, you must support his would-be assassins. If you disagree with the racist conspiracy theories, then you must endorse murder. It's a rhetorical technique designed to make any criticism literally equivalent to supporting terrorism, which we all know isn't true. And I think what makes this analysis quite powerful is that O'Brien's refusal, or O'Brien's refusing in playing along with the tribalism. He condemns Kirk's murder unequivocally, and whilst also examining what Kirk actually stood for, which I think is a completely fair position to have. He lists political violence from both sides while maintaining that violence is wrong regardless of who does it. And I think it's that kind of level-headed approach that we should be looking at this incident with. But I'm going to leave it there. Appreciate it's quite a difficult topic to speak about, but I am keen to see what you guys think in the comments. So let me know, and I'll catch you in the next one.